Blessed to be part of your day. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Just got word from our friend Tommy Ahlquist. He'll be joining us coming up this half hour of the program. Business developer, man of the world. We're going to continue to find out what he's up to. We'll get his response to the Mike Moyle-led legislation that has become law, the Urban Renewal Bill. We'll also get his thoughts on development and the future here of the economy in the Treasure Valley. He's building a lot of things. He's talking to folks all around the world and across the country. And I can't wait to hear what he has to say about this. He's got a different take on urban renewal than a lot of us. So Tommy Ahlquist will be joining us. Don't forget, win Kevin Miller's cash. You can win up to $5,000 simply by listening at 6 a.m., 8 a.m., and 3 p.m. during the Sean Hannity Show. When you hear the code words, type it into KIDOTalkRadio.com, and you could be a winner. Joining us now from the Heritage Foundation is Thomas Jipping. Mr. Jipping, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We take a look at what's going on here pertaining to the legal system and the high court. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but certainly it's probably one of the more important pillars of governance, who selects the judges and their confirmation process.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, America's founders designed the judiciary to be the least dangerous and the weakest branch, and it's the only branch we don't elect. And yet the judiciary has become the most powerful and the most misunderstood. That's a bad combination. That ignorance is not bliss. So we've really got to focus more on how the judiciary is supposed to function, what kind of judges we ought to have on the bench, because that's probably more important than any particular piece of legislation that Congress might pass.
Boy, you tell us, you're talking to the choir here, Mr. Jipping, especially us that are under the beloved blanket of the Ninth Circuit here.
Yeah, well, that's changing too, and of course the conflicts that you see over individual judicial appointments, including some of the ones that President Trump is making to the Ninth Circuit, those conflicts really aren't over those individual nominees. The conflict is really over judicial power. It's really over how much power judges are supposed to have, how they're supposed to function in our system of government. Every one of these, whether it's a Supreme Court nomination like Brett Kavanaugh's or Neil Gorsuch, a Court of Appeals nomination, all of these conflicts are the same, and it's a choice that we have between two radically different ways of the judiciary functioning in our system of government.
Right. It seems to me that the legislative and executive branches can't do their jobs anymore because the judges seem to run everything, and if you don't like how things go, just go shop a court and you'll get something overturned.
Well, yeah, and think of it this way. Both the legislative and executive branches, the legislature produces statutes that are written down. The executive branch oftentimes produces regulations that are written down. But think of it in your own life. You can have anything written on a piece of paper, but whoever gets to tell you what those words mean controls everything. And that's what the courts do. The courts determine what the words of our laws produced by the other two branches mean. And they're either going to respect what the legislature intended them to mean, or judges are going to make it up. And if judges make it up, they run the show. So it really does come down to that. And the way you put it, I think, is correct. The other two branches of government can only do their job as they're elected to do if we have the right kind of judge on the bench.
And when we take a look at, and this is a little off topic, but when we take a look at the Supreme Court, many conservatives are a little worried about the Chief Justice and the latest justice appointed to the Supreme Court. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Justice Kavanaugh has been there, about 8 months. He's going to be there about 40 years. Conservatives a lot of times are like permanently in a bad mood. They want to find something wrong with everything. The fact is, in 1986, I worked for Justice Scalia when he was appointed to the Supreme Court, and I remember in his first term, the Washington Post said that he was going to, strengthen the liberal wing of the court. Just take a breath. We know what Justice Kavanaugh's approach to judging is. We know what his judicial philosophy is. It's the right one. just because there might be an individual decision here or there among the hundreds and hundreds of cases that he will participate in that you don't like, doesn't mean there's anything wrong. He's the right kind of judge to have on the bench. And frankly, I think that the Chief Justice is too. There's some differences, but I think those are two, and Justice Gorsuch as well, three great members of the court.
I don't think anybody has a problem with Justice Gorsuch, but you take a look at John Roberts and the Obamacare decision. People are a little, hurt about that. And Mr. Jipping, you can appreciate this. I just have to say two words to you, and this is why conservatives are upset. David Souter.
Well, but the circumstances surrounding the Souter nomination, and I was working in Washington in this field at that time, are completely different. Chief Justice Roberts has been there for almost 14 years. There is one decision that has some question marks about it, but we could spend an hour talking about dozens of other decisions on very important topics, including constitutional issues, where the Chief Justice has been an absolute champion. So as I say, talk about what you don't like. That's true, but let's talk about the whole record. Let's not, abandon or ignore about 90% of what he does.
Thomas Jipping joining us from the Heritage Foundation. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Your thoughts, based on your extensive knowledge and experience concerning the battle over the biggest issue of all, Roe v. Wade, how do you think that will play out when you have Texas considering a bill that would make abortion murder? You've got the heartbeat bills going in states. Do you believe they'll make their way up the ladder? And will the Supreme Court have to make a difficult decision?
Well, I think they do. They will make their way up the ladder. They will be challenged, obviously, in court, and then the Court of Appeals, and then they'll be appealed to the Supreme Court. People do need to know that the Supreme Court doesn't just sit there and kind of say, well, what cases do we want to decide today? Which issues do we want to mess around in today? How do we want to change the country today? The Supreme Court decides only about 80 cases a year, and they get about 10,000 appeals a year. So there are very rigorous criteria about the cases that they get involved in. They've had probably 36 abortion cases since Roe versus Wade. They've decided almost every aspect of abortion law one way or the other. So that makes it a very different picture as to whether a case that starts, let's say, in a legislature with a bill like you mentioned, will necessarily get before the Supreme Court. I hope it does, and I hope by that time we have a majority of justices, not necessarily who are pro-life in the sense that they would reverse Roe versus Wade because of their personal views about abortion. Judges are not supposed to decide their cases based on their personal views. But I hope we have a majority of justices who know that our written Constitution doesn't include a right to abortion, and judges have no power to make one up. That's the issue that is most important. That's the biggest reason why Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. And it's also the very reason why a lot of other cases are wrongly decided. And we need to have a strong defense of a written Constitution and the role of judges that is limited to taking the Constitution as it's written.
Just like the executive powers have been expanded, Mr. Jipping, and you've touched on this before here on KIDO Talk Radio, how did we come into this role where it was supposed to be the weakest branch of government has become arguably the strongest?
Well, I think that the change occurred in the 1930s. FDR was elected telling the country that the federal government was going to get us out of the Depression. The federal government was going to use a whole lot of power over the economy that the Constitution did not give it. Everything was so desperate, and people kind of looked the other way when he appointed 8 different Supreme Court justices in about 5 years any appointed justices who were willing to change the meaning of the Constitution. But they did it in a way that people really wanted them to do. They wanted them to solve this terrible economic problem. But once you cross that line, once you install a judiciary that's willing to make stuff up, rather than a judiciary that says we've just simply got to follow the Constitution, then all bets are off over time. And it was kind of downhill from there. So it was the appointment of different kinds of judges that changed all of this, and that's also how we can improve things today, is by appointing the right kind of judges.
Finally, sir, your thoughts on the president and his judicial appointments.
I think President Trump is appointing consistently the best group of judges that I have seen from any president, at least in my 30 years here in Washington. It is a very consistent group that is focused on the correct role of judges. They know what their proper designed role is supposed to be. They are all highly qualified. And that's why Democrats fight them so much. Remember, Democrats want a different kind of judiciary. They want a political judiciary. They want judges to decide cases in order to promote certain political interests. Trump is appointing the opposite kind of judge, the kind that America's founders designed us to have, and he's doing just a phenomenal job. Republicans are making improvements, too, in how we process those judges in the Senate. It's really, in my opinion, it's really consistently the best thing that the president is doing since he got elected.
Well, Thomas Jipping from the Heritage Foundation, we appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next, Tommy Ahlquist, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. And joining us now, the champion of freedom and development, Tommy Ahlquist. Good morning, sir.
That's quite the intro, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm always thinking of you because, I learn a lot from our Inspired Excellence podcast. You were talking about urban renewal. You were talking about it may not be perfect, but it's the only system that we have for development. And I'm glad, sir, your ears were burning this morning.
You've been on fire. You've been in character as the Clint Eastwood Gran Torino this morning for sure, buddy. Throwing flames. No, I understand everyone's frustration, and believe me, if you look through the uses of urban renewal throughout the state, there's certainly example after example of how this tool has been completely misused. I mean, it just has. So if you look at the history of how we fund and how we fund infrastructure and bond and do things here, we just are very, very limited. Other states that are very conservative just have more options for public funding that are totally appropriately used. And you have to have those mechanisms to have a society that functions. Everyone complains a lot about everything that goes on around us, but what are the tools that allow you to do that? So I get it. I get that everyone's frustrated. I get that everyone wanted to go after Mayor Beater on this and stop the use of those funds down there. I just wish that there was some balance and that there was some story told on how it is appropriately used. There are plenty of great examples of how urban renewal is used appropriately as the only tool in the toolbox, where you are able to have private dollars up front pay for public infrastructure costs, and then allow those public dollars that come from taxes that are created by those private dollars pay back those public improvements. That's urban renewal when it's used well. There is another side to the story. It's too bad we only have one tool in the toolbox, and it's too bad that it's easier just to continue to attack it. I get that, but at some point we need a fix that allows us to have more tools in that toolbox.
Well, and you pointed that out to Representative Moyle when he was considering this bill. Yeah, this passed through the House, it passed through the Senate. You take a look at why do you think it was so popular? And if you were, and look, you had my vote, sir. I voted for you for governor. What would be the alternative to helping development, sir?
Well, so the alternative is that we actually need three different pieces of legislation. One where you have urban renewal that's truly urban renewal for blight, but then you do have a mechanism for tax increment financing. And then we've at some point got to look at the way we bond and public voting on public infrastructure. So, I'm in the camp that if you're going to build public buildings, taxpayers should have a say on that. And that's the problem, Kevin, is on public infrastructure like a public safety building or a library, that should be something that the taxpayers, its tax dollars, have a say on. Absolutely. The problem is we have this one bill, which is urban renewal, which also covers tax increment financing. It also covers really good things that happen to change blighted blocks on cities where private dollars prepay those public infrastructure costs. So the problem is it's all blended together and it's easy to attack. The other thing I'll tell you, and I don't blame Mike. I mean, if you look at how easy it is to message this, hey, they're misusing your public dollars. I mean, of course it sells through because that's easy. What's hard is thoughtful legislation that actually gets to the root of the problem. And I don't know if that'll ever happen because it's just too easy to continue to do what's been done for the last several years on this issue.
All right. Continuing on with your point, Tommy Ahlquist joining us, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Do you believe, as someone who meets with people all the time from all over the world, all over the country, that are interested here in the Treasure Valley, interested in the state, you've invested a lot of time, effort, and energy into making Idaho better. Could this impact growth here in a negative way?
I mean, sure, it's going to have an impact, right? I mean, I think, again, we're talking about how do we fund public infrastructure, which is a different conversation than how do you appropriately use tax increment financing. So, we have problems, Kevin. As good as everything seems most of the time here, what is the plan for public transportation and funding of it? There's plenty of plans out there. If you sit and look at what's the plan for I-84, what's the plan for expand, go to ACHD or ITD, they have plenty of plans for, here's the future improvements. What they don't have a plan for is how are we going to pay for it? So there needs to be very thoughtful policy on, hey, are we using tax dollars efficiently now, which you and I have talked a lot about this. We're not. If you look at the way tax dollars are spent currently, it's just not like the real world, and so those tax dollars need to be more appropriately spent by government. And then secondly, you do need a way to plan and fund infrastructure. My current thoughts on that are I just think that we're going to get to a point where we're at gridlock, and then finally there'll be some public outcry of saying, hey, we've got to do something to fund infrastructure. I hope also that as Governor Little settles in, that he takes a look at how we spend tax dollars and some of the policies and the way ITD funds currently. They're just too expensive. The way that they spend money, the way they prioritize dollars, it's just, when you get a view of the underbelly of government, it's just not efficient. It's not built to work or run the way it works in the private world because they're spending our money, Kevin. They're not spending their own, and it's a big difference when you do that.
Well, and I think that's the frustration that people have talked about for years on this program and others with the urban renewal situation. On a positive note, though, you're developing, you're building, you're meeting with people. Can you give us some insight into what are you hearing from folks wanting to come here, wanting to live in the Treasure Valley?
Yeah, as much as you hear complaints about what's going on here, I mean, you got people fleeing the People's Republic of California, companies. There's companies that are just relocating to get out. Good news for us is a lot of those companies have very conservative values, and they're saying, hey, we're going to go to a place where it still looks like America. And so there are a lot of companies. I've never seen a time like now where we're meeting with company after company after company that is just saying, hey, we want to relocate off the coast, whether that's Seattle or San Francisco or Los Angeles, and just come to somewhere where it looks more like America. And those companies come here, and we've got a lot to offer in the talent that we have here. A lot of those companies are transplanting talent from other places to Idaho. It's a good place to do business. But again, that's a good thing as long as that growth is smart, that it makes sense, that we do it in a way that we kind of minimize urban sprawl, and we have the right tools to support it with infrastructure. Not all growth is good, and not all change is good, but change is inevitable. I guess that's I talk to a lot of people who are very worried about, hey, how is Idaho going to stay Idaho? How do we keep our values? How do we keep the beautiful, state that we have, both in heritage and in those conservative principles with everyone moving in? And I think the answer to that is very simple. Well, we better lead with conservative policy and ideas that keep us the way we are. And if we don't, then, we're going to change, and not all change is good. But a lot of thought needs to go into it. What we're doing is, we're trying to do good developments that harmonize with those values and harmonize with what's going on around us. But we have a lot of, you're here in the Treasure Valley, and things are going well. But you get right outside of here, and there's a lot of poverty in Idaho. We need higher paying jobs. We need to keep our kids here. We need these companies to have jobs that allow kids to stay in Idaho. So that's the power of growth that we need to harness. That's a good thing, keeping kids here, having jobs that are sustainable for families. And so it needs to be done right, but we're doing everything we can on the private side to make that happen.
Tommy Ahlquist joining us, Ball Ventures Ahlquist, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Okay, I know you've got to get to work, so I'm going to give you 3 quick ones, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. That's great.
All right. Number 1, Medicaid expansion. It was passed. The governor signed it. It's going to be some lawsuits. I know it's fuzzy right now, but overall, in general, any comment?
Yeah, so I think that I get, again, on people's frustration with healthcare. And as you know, Kevin, we're doing a lot right now to try to lower costs for people in healthcare, because that is the number one issue for America and Idaho right now, is how can you afford healthcare? Do I think that more government involvement is good? Absolutely not. And I think that as long as the private sector, and it's not giant systems that are in on the same joke, we've got to watch how those dollars are spent. It's passed now, so how do we do it the Idaho way, and how do we do it where it's not part of this government bureaucracy that continues to grow and just make things worse? You know that, Kevin. It just increases costs. It never really gets to the root cause. And I think there's a lot of private sector solutions that are on their way.
Candace Owens, she testified before the House Judiciary Committee. You know her very well.
Yeah, did you see that? I was very proud of her last. I sat and watched that her testimony, and I was proud of her. It's what I love about her is she's wicked smart, and she takes some of this liberal, just this narrative that is so wrong, and turns it on its head. And you watch these white liberal guys try to attack her, and it's sometimes just very funny to watch. She's super smart. She's been a good friend and continues to be a good friend. I think she's doing great things. But what I love about her is she's able to say things and push back where others aren't.
From Turning Point USA, and your passion is basketball, so we'll make you smile on this one. The retirement of Dirk Nowitzki and Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, big retirements last night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Magic stepping down, and then Dirk and Dwayne Wade is one of my favorites of all time. I've never seen anyone work as hard as he has, or be. You go back to those games where he's always in the mix of everything, and one of my favorite players of all time. And then Dirk's fantastic too. It's the end of another era for us old guys that keep watching some of these legends retire. I guess that means we're getting old, Kevin.
Yeah, yes, sir. And how about the Virginia team, man?
Hey, how about that game? That was the end of that game was unbelievable. That shot that Hunter hit from the corner was unbelievable. So I know you love talking sports. We bring on these guests on our podcast to try to talk about issues that matter. You always drag us down into sports. I'm just kidding. It's good talking to you, buddy.
Thank you, Tommy Ahlquist. We appreciate you, sir.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye. Our great friend, Tommy Ahlquist. You can catch him on the Inspire Excellence podcast, iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you find podcasts. Traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And coming up, Liberty Linda. My apologies, Liberty Linda. We'll get to you next. Let's find out what's happening in your world. KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. And coming up, best-selling author Liberty Linda. First, we go to Simon Owen joining us live from London, Fox News Radio, exclusively on KIDO Talk Radio here in the Treasure Valley. That's 107.5 FM, 580 AM. And Simon, BB is back.
Morning, Kevin. Yes, a really interesting election in Israel, and it appears to have been a successful one for Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister there. He looks like he stands a good chance of keeping his job. He certainly sees it that way. He's calling it a tremendous victory. And if confirmed, this would be Netanyahu's 5th term in office. And in July, he would become Israel's longest-serving prime minister.
Which is amazing, because a couple weeks ago, it seemed like he was done.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth saying he's not technically there yet. The way Israeli elections work, it's all about your party and how many seats you win in parliament. And Netanyahu's party, Likud, the right-wing party, looks like it is neck and neck with its main challenger, which is a really interesting, brand new alliance, centrist alliance called Blue and White, led by a retired military chief called Benny Gantz. And if we weren't talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning, we'd have been talking about Prime Minister Gantz. And he has emerged in this election campaign as someone who, for a while, looks like he might pose a real threat to Netanyahu's dominance. Well, with nearly all the results in now, these two parties, headed by these two men, appear to be neck and neck. But Netanyahu has a clearer path to power because it was always likely that whoever won would need to form a plurality government, a coalition government, find some allies elsewhere in parliament. And it's Netanyahu who looks to have those allies ready to go into business with him so he can head up another administration. So, yeah, I mean, it seems Israel has stuck with Benjamin Netanyahu. I think there is a question still about how long that is the case because there is a huge scandal that's hung over this election. Netanyahu is facing possible indictment on a series of corruption charges in an investigation which he calls a witch hunt. But if that doesn't go his way, then Israel could be looking at more elections maybe in just a few months.
Indeed. What about the Trump effect? Is that true? Do you think that helped Netanyahu?
Well, his party certainly played on it extensively. So they seem to think so. I mean, we can't know until you've got detailed election studies and so on what drove people's vote. But certainly, I mean, there is a real closeness between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. And Israel is one of the few countries where, you know, an alliance with President Trump is actually seen as a selling point when it comes to campaigning. It's so much so that Netanyahu's party used these giant posters, the side of buildings, in this campaign, featuring a smiling President Trump shaking Netanyahu's hand. Netanyahu visited the White House. That always looks good if you're trying to appear statesmanlike. And the U.S., during this campaign, recognized the previously disputed Golan Heights as Israeli territory. That is land that previously the international community had said was disputed. Israel seized it from Syria in the 60s. And so, you know, there was all these situations going on where both sides seemed to be keen the Trump administration appeared keen on helping Netanyahu, and Netanyahu appeared very keen on accepting whatever help the Trump administration was willing to offer. I think there is a question about what it means going forward. I mean, they are so close that we can expect them, I suppose, to remain close allies, but you never know. But the big move coming from the Trump administration is the question of what it's going to do about Mideast peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. And we've been waiting years now for a plan from Jared Kushner, the president's advisor. All he has said is that this plan would be revealed sometime after this election. Well, the election's now out of the way. It looks like Netanyahu is going to stay in power, which presumably smooths things as far as the Trump administration's planning is concerned.
Right.
So are we now going to see this plan for what President Trump has said could be, in his words, the deal of the century?
Indeed. Well, you'll be on top of it, Simon. We appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Simon Owen joining us. Okay, here she is. We're so sorry it took us so long to get you. Good morning, Liberty Linda.
Good morning. It's always wonderful to listen to your show, Kevin. Thank you for having our future President Alquist on this morning. And, yeah, I think he'll be our president in a few years, I hope. So anyway, you'd be the one backing him, right?
Well, look, he had my vote for governor.
Yeah, he had mine as well. So he has my vote in a couple of years for president.
You know, when people get mad and, whether it's Tea Party Bob or whoever said, don't blame me, I voted for Tommy.
I did too.
Yeah, so, don't blame me. I voted for Tommy.
I voted for Tommy. And, and we have to remember, though, in regard to your future, a couple guests back you just had, Judge Roberts gave us Obama not care. Now, we have to remember that. He's a conservative, supposedly. But he did give us Obama not care. And I'll always remember that. And then your guest you have, in regard to our courts, not our Supreme Court, but what we're missing in our courts is a 12-man jury. We used to have 12-man juries, and now we just have a judge making a decision. It seems like we have that all the time. And unfortunately, we're getting judges in there that are not making good decisions for us. So I just wanted to bring that out. And, it's so wonderful to tune into your show every morning and hear truth, Kevin. You know, we listen to the liberal socialists out there today, and our jaws are hanging open in unbelief of what's going on in our nation. What we are hearing is unimaginable to us. I recently flew to Toronto, Canada, and this man in the airport just walked up to me and started almost yelling at me and saying, "We have a communistic country here, and we're going to keep it no matter what you say." And I looked at him and I thought, "Who is this person? You know, does he know I'm Liberty Linder or something? You know, but nobody could know that in Canada." I couldn't believe what he was saying to me. So anyway, there are people up in Canada that think their government is communistic about that, and they like it.
Well, they can have Canada.
But, you know, we think about what's going on here, Kevin, and I ask myself, why would a complete stranger walk up to me and say that? And why in the world would anyone in the United States want a socialistic government?
Well, that's what we're battling in the arena of ideas every day. You have the devious little libs. You have Costco Cortez. You've got Mayor Pete. You've got Bernie. You've got, and I thought I would never say this, but former President Obama seeming conservative compared to what we have today.
Absolutely. It frightens us. They're all coming out openly as socialists. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. This isn't supposed to happen here. And it is. And it's amazing because what they try to do is overtop the other person. If a person, you know, conservative tries to get a word in edgewise, they won't let them. We see it on the news. We see it everywhere. And, we understand this. We see it, and we know what they're trying to do. And so anyway, it's just an amazing thing what's going on in our government, with the Mueller report, with everything we're seeing. We are sitting back here with our jaws open and thinking, this is not happening in our country. This cannot be happening in our country. Our border, our president's trying to do the right thing for us. And why are they fighting him? It's unbelievable to we, the citizens, are sitting back and watching this. So we just need to get together, and we need to vote the right man in again, President Trump, again.
Until Tommy Alquist runs for governor.
Well,
or run for president.
He can run afterwards.
All right.
And I'll vote for Tommy Alquist for President of the United States.
All right, Liberty Linda. We appreciate you. Don't be going to those foreign countries anymore.
Well, we'll see. But anyway, we love you, Kevin, and that's the most important thing. Keep that. Kevin Millen, we'd like to keep you steamed up.
All right. Thank you, Liberty Linda.
You keep us steamed up, Kevin. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. 580-5436, 580-KIDO. You know, earlier we were talking to Tommy Alquist about his friend Candace Owens, who's a conservative activist who has done her very best to reach out to the young people. Recently, she was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. Will share her remarks concerning the criticism that the devious little libs fired at her. You don't want to miss that. That's next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. And blessed to be part of your day, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Coming up, Candace Owens sounds off about white nationalism. Candace Owens, African-American young lady from Turning Point USA, very conservative young lady. We'll get to her in a minute. Joining us now is Tea Party Bob with his headset on KIDO Talk Radio. By the way, Tommy Alquist wanted me to say to tell you hi.
You know, I was going to say good morning, Mr. Miller, and this is a great morning. I might have to change my opinion of the governor, as I do see him taking some very interesting conservative stands on some very controversial issues, especially this Medicaid bill and the 1159 bill. I also want to congratulate Mike Moyle for his hard work on the urban renewal bill. And I think we would all like to encourage him to tackle the grocery repeal in the next session with the same vim and vigor. If he's really a true conservative, he will be the champion of the people if he gets that through. I'd also like to say a few things about urban renewal since Tommy had his little dissertation.
He did. Truthfully, he did say he thought of you, and he said, hey, tell Tea Party Bob I said hi, because he knows you're a big fan of his.
I don't have much against urban renewal if it's done properly, but first of all, what we're seeing in many cases in Idaho is not true urban renewal. What you have basically in urban renewal is you take downtrodden areas and you revitalize them or rebuild them to make them economically viable. What we've been seeing is a wholesale use of taxpayer monies to build developments, which are mostly beneficial to the developers at the expense of the taxpayers. You know, the taxpayers are doing a good amount of the infrastructure financing over the 20-year periods, and this financing is being done without their approval. And in many cases, these projects extend way beyond the original intentions. If a project is viable, then there should be money available to do it privately, just as when a new company starts, it will get money from investors if they believe it's a viable entity. And if it's not, maybe it's not the right time for the project. You know, another point of this is that these projects are done and go way beyond their intended purposes, and the infrastructure needed to support them winds up coming from higher taxes, where more of it should come from impact fees. And as we've seen lately, many of the cities in the Treasure Valley have increased their impact fees substantially, finally recognizing that we do have way too much growth and too little funds for the infrastructure. So I agree with Tommy that government is not the answer to the infrastructure problem, but neither is taxing homeowners to death, and having a public input will give developers more pause before embarking on some of these grandiose projects. And believe it or not, I want to thank Governor Little and the conservative members of the legislature for injecting the mandatory work requirement into the Medicaid bill, which is quite rational and reasonable. I do see us struggling as a state to find money for this new giveaway program in the future, and especially if the feds cut the funds reimbursement below 90%. So for now, it looks good, but I will tell you that all of this money is borrowed. And as we have learned just recently, most of the money supporting the initiative came from out-of-state sources who have a vested interest in seeing more of these types of social programs implemented. We're going to suffer the consequences for whatever happens with Medicaid expansion. But the people who promoted it and got it implemented are not going to suffer anything. In fact, they are going to gain from this. I want to thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. Thank you for your show because it gets better every day.
Thank you, Tea Party Bob. We appreciate you. Let's get you to traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And Kevin Miller in the morning here. So Candace Owens addressing this whole vibe about white nationalism. By the way, Facebook has determined that anything to do with racism or perceived racism, white racism, they're going to take down, which is admirable, but they still leave up the terrorist things, which is strange. So here you have Candace Owens responding to Representative Ted Lieu for, as she says, flagrantly distorting her comments. Let's take a listen on KIDO Talk Radio.
Yes, I think it's pretty apparent that Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again. Witness may continue.
Sure, even though I was called despicable.
Witness may not refer to a member of the committee as stupid.
I didn't refer to him as stupid. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. You didn't listen to what I said. May I continue?
Please.
As I said, he is assuming that black people will not go pursue the full 2-hour clip. And he purposefully he cut off, and you didn't hear the question that was asked of me. He's trying to present as if I was launching a defense of Hitler in Germany, when in fact, the question that was asked of me was pertaining to whether or not I believed that whether or not I believed in nationalism, and that nationalism was bad. And what I responded to was that I do not believe that we should be characterizing Hitler as a nationalist. He was a homicidal, psychopathic maniac that killed his own people. A nationalist would not kill their own people. That is exactly what I was referring to in the clip, and he purposely wanted to give you a cut-up similar to what they do to Donald Trump to create a different narrative. That was unbelievably dishonest, and he did not allow me to respond to it, which is worrisome and should tell you a lot about where people are today in terms of trying to drum up narratives. By the way, I would like to also add that I work for Prager University, which is run by an Orthodox Jew. Not a single Democrat showed up to the embassy opening in Jerusalem. I sat on a plane for 18 hours to make sure that I was there. I'm deeply offended by the insinuation of revealing that clip without the question that was asked of me.
She's a young lady that we'll be tuning into for quite some time. We hope you stay with us. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.